we'll have two of Colorado's sort of most prolific climate legislators. We'll have Representative Edie Hooton joining us, as well as Tracy Burnett. So we're super excited about that. They'll be joining us probably later on in the workshop for a Q&A session, so you have opportunities to talk with legislators themselves. So just, let's see. A brief note about the importance of state climate action. We face a dwindling window of opportunity to reduce emissions in line with Paris Agreement targets of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And while our federal government has not effectively delivered the kind of broad scale climate policies we need to align our emissions trajectory with the 1.5 degree future, state action, we've seen a lot of progress at the state level in the past couple of years, especially in Colorado. And so we're here today to prepare ourselves to continue to keep up the pressure at the state level, and really just have the knowledge and the skills to continue to drive bold action at the state level where it is desperately needed. Couple logistical notes: if folks could type their questions in the chat as we go, we'll do our best to answer your questions. We have a packed agenda, so we're not going to do like a traditional just speaking out your questions. We'll just type them in the chat, try to answer them. And yeah, that's that. So to get to know each other, we have prepared a quick interactive workshop exercise, and we're going to use this platform called Google Jamboards. And so I'm going to walk us through this exercise. It's pretty easy, and I'll make sure to give us all thorough instructions so that it's very straightforward. So before I give you all a link to click on, Google Jamboard is kind of like, you can think about it as like a virtual bulletin board that we're all going to be adding to in the moment. And so I'm going to provide a link in the chat, and you're all going to click on that, and I will give you instructions to answer 3 specific questions that will help us get to know each other. So I'm going to go ahead and post the link in the chat for you all. So if everyone could click on that link that's in the chat, you will open up. I'm going to actually start sharing my screen here. Great, I'm seeing a lot of people on this chat. Or on the Google Jamboard. So folks can also just follow along by looking at my screen. So the first thing, the first question we're going to answer on Google Jamboard is, where are you tuning in from? And the way that you're going to answer that question, and try not to move the map around too much, but the way you're going to answer that question is actually going to this left-hand column here and clicking on the pen, and then you can choose your marker type and then your color. And so I'm going to choose this one and black, and I'm going to go ahead and circle where I'm tuning in from in the map. So if everyone could go ahead, click a pen, and then circle on this map where you're tuning in from. I'm seeing folks from Boulder, from Durango. We got someone coming in. And then also, if you're not comfortable using the Google Jamboard, feel free to just type in the chat where you're coming from. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of folks tuning in from the Front Range area. Clustered in the Denver Boulder area. Seeing someone from Summit County is here. Colorado Springs, El Paso County. Seeing Jefferson County, Littleton, Golden, Fort Collins. Someone from the Roaring Fork Valley, it looks like. Awesome. So yeah, we got a decent spread of folks from across the state, and we're really appreciative of the folks that are joining us from the Western Slope and Larimer County, and So anyway, it's great to have folks from all over joining us today. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next frame here, and everyone wants to go up to the top and just click next frame. That will bring you to a new slide that says, "What brings you here today?" So we click on the next frame button. And then, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to answer this question, but this time, instead of using a pen, we're going to go ahead and use this sticky note here. So if you go to the left-hand column again, you'll see a little icon of a sticky note. And you're just going to click that button and then type an answer to the question, "What brings you here today?" So yeah, we'll give folks a quick moment to answer that question.
And Duncan, some folks are saying in the chat that they're getting a note that there are too many people in the Jamboard. So if you're getting that, just pop over to the chat, and we have folks putting things in the chat too.
Okay, I didn't realize there was a capacity limit. Sorry about that. So yeah, I'm just going to start reading some of these out. We got a lot of answers flowing in. What brings you here today? Learning how to best advocate for necessary legislation. Hoping to learn how I can best make a difference. Because my faith calls me to care for creation, and I want to leave a livable planet for the next generation. Keep fossil fuels in the ground. Legislative advocacy is part of my job, and I want to get better at it. New to legislative advocacy, I want to make the world a better place. To learn about the legislative process, to decarbonize everything. Great answer.
Yeah, good answer.
Looking for tips on COVID era lobbying. Great. I want to be as effective as possible in trying to make change. To share and collaborate on climate policy. I'm passionate about climate change, and I love Colorado. To learn more about the legislative process plus action. Wholesale ecological destruction of the planet and toxic polluters always getting off the hook. I feel that. Great. So lots of reasons why we're all here, but it seems like we're all here for similar reasons, which is great. And we're going to do our best to make sure that folks get up to speed on everything they need to know to learn about the legislative process and how to make action or take action and make a difference. All right, so last exercise here. What climate related issues are you most passionate about? So I would love to hear from folks. Again, we're going to use the sticky note button here. So left-hand column, 4 things down, click on the sticky note, answer the question. What climate related issues are you most passionate or interested in? And again, if there's a capacity limit that you're facing, just feel free to type your answer in the chat so folks can see it. All right, I got some answers flowing in here. What climate related issues are you most passionate about? Changing the demand away from fossil fuels, sustainable agriculture, and environmental justice. Pretty much all of them. Just transition, diversifying the economy so we aren't reliant on revenue from fossil fuel production. Carbon reduction for everyday people. Sustainable, water use and wildfires. It's hard to pick. Environmental justice and how to protect the most vulnerable populations. Thinking about how we support youth in developing, understanding, and taking action. Amazing. Just transition, toxics, ecology, and the relationship of society to technology. Net zero inclusive urban planning, water conservation, stop burning fossil fuels, methane-free buildings, and distributed solar. Electrification of transport and residential sectors, and move to renewable electricity. So as we can see here, many, many different issues that are related to this climate fight that we are in. And we are super excited to have a group today that is so passionate about a large breadth of issues, because really there is no silver bullet to the climate crisis, it's silver buckshot. And we're gonna, a lot of these issues are directly relevant to some legislation that we may see in 2022 or following years. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And I wanted to note that we're going to be sharing this with our legislators that are going to be joining us today, so that they know the issues that their constituents care about, and they can just see on one dashboard where folks are from, what they care about, and what brings them to this workshop today. So that's all. Thanks so much for participating in that. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to our next presenter, Ali Lilly. Oh, sorry, Brent, for a land acknowledgement.
Yeah, thank you, Duncan. And can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we're just going to start with a land acknowledgement, something we'd like to do before any of our major events. So let us acknowledge with deep respect that the lands upon which we gather today are the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Apache, Comanche, Osage, and Kiowa nations and peoples, that we respect the indigenous stewards of this land, past, present, and future, and thank them for generations of caring for these lands, its fresh flowing air and clean waters, and precious living inhabitants, large and small. We remember the painful history of genocide and forced removal under settler colonialism, and commit ourselves to dismantling structures that perpetuate this legacy and the status quo. As these words of acknowledgement are spoken, may they reaffirm the ties of all indigenous peoples of over 48 historic tribes to these unceded lands that we call Colorado. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name's Deb McNamara, and I am one of the campaign staffers here at 350 Colorado. And I just want to say welcome and thank you all so much for being here. I see a lot of people that have already been involved with us for some time, but I also see some new faces. So we just wanted to quickly let everybody know a little bit about us as an organization. So our mission statement is all around building the local grassroots movement to solve the climate crisis and transition to a sustainable future. We have over 20,000 folks who are with us as part of our 350 community, and we really are excited to be a grassroots movement building focus organization. And we believe that we are going to solve this crisis with the pressure of people power. And that's part of what we're here today to talk about and get clear about. The legislative path is one way to do that. And Amy, you could go to the next slide. So in general, these are some of our pillars of action. So we're working to build a grassroots movement that includes you, all of us who are showing up at hearings, connecting with legislators, attending rallies, marches, protests, writing emails, making phone calls. That's all part of the solution that we need right now to keep the pressure on. We are working on keeping fossil fuels in the ground. So we have a lot going on, working on halting fracking and oil and gas development in the state, transitioning away from coal, and lots of hearings you can get involved in. So I just want to remind everybody, the legislative path is one path to making change, but we also have a number of state entities that we're pressuring, including the Air Quality Control Commission and the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and many others, the PUC. So stay tuned, lots of opportunities to use your voice to create the changes that we need. We're also working to promote a just and equitable transition to renewable energy. And this isn't reflected here, but we also are heavily involved in fossil fuel divestment campaigns here in the state and at the national level too. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Amy. So I wanted to remind, well, I'm going to say a couple more words about 350, but I also wanted to just ground us today in why we're doing this. I think we probably all know, we're in a climate crisis. We want to see a dramatic reduction in our fossil fuel use, and we need to, in order to get the parts per million down of carbon in the atmosphere down. And that's why we're called 350. So I just wanted to remind everybody that is where our name comes from. If we were at 350 parts per million, that's the safe upper limit of CO2 in the atmosphere that we would ideally like to see. We're currently at 415 parts per million, and that is continuing to rise. So we are in a crisis, and unfortunately our leaders are not doing enough to help steer us where we need to steer. There's only so much that individual action can solve. We believe in that too. But I just wanted to remind us all about that. And that's why we're called 350. And we are a science-based organization. And so everything that we're asking for is that we want our decision makers to make choices that are in line with keeping our temperature rise at 1.5 degrees. And as time goes on, that's looking, it's hard. It's going to be hard, but we're going to keep working really hard, and that's what we're doing here today. So I just wanted to remind us and kind of ground us in like why this is so important. And so hopefully today you will be taking something with you and choosing an action that you'll want to follow. I just wanted to say too, just a few things about 350 for those who are new. So I mentioned, we're a grassroots organization. I love that 350 provides a mix of structural work, like work at structural level. So making change at the organization level or the legislative level. So there's that structural component of our campaign work, but then there's also a protest element to our work too. And we're looking forward to being able to do more of that as hopefully we're moving through this pandemic. We also are really excited about our citizen lobbying power, and this will be my transition, and I'll hand it over to Allie, who's going to talk about the legislative process. But we believe that people power is untapped, especially as lobbyists. So we are wanting to cultivate more citizen lobbying power. Last legislative session, we had over 110 people participate in our Climate Lobby Week. And we set up meetings with over 60 legislators. Like, that's huge. So I just want to, folks who weren't involved last year or wondering how this all fits together, that's where we're heading. We want to get as many of us as possible, talking with our legislators, continuing to make the demands for climate leadership. And we will get really specific about pieces of legislation that we're supporting as we know more about what's happening. Last legislative session, we as a state set a record for the most number of climate-related bills that passed ever in the state's history. So that's awesome. That's really good news. We're hoping for even more this next session. So I just kind of wanted to point to, we have a little bit of momentum. And actually, I think I'll leave it there. That feels like a good place to leave it. And I don't want to take up too much more time, but just want to remind everybody that each of us can be part of this. And this climate legislation doesn't pass easily. It requires a lot of negotiating and amendments. And Allie's going to talk a little bit about that, and a ton of pressure from people like us who are working to keep our leaders accountable. So again, thank you for being here. I'm going to pass it over to Allie, and again, continue to put your questions in the chat too, and we're working on answering them throughout. Go ahead, Allie.
All right, thanks, Deb, for that introduction. My name is Allie Lowy, and I'm a legislative intern with 350. I'm going to be giving you guys a brief run through of the Colorado legislative process. Next slide. So before we begin, it's important to know that the Colorado General Assembly follows a very similar structure and process to the federal Congress. In the House, there are 65 members that serve 2-year terms, and in the Senate, there are 35 members that serve for 4 years. In the House, more populous regions get more representation, whereas in the Senate, representation isn't population dependent. And these two chambers are convened during the legislative session, which generally runs from mid-January to mid-May, although that can vary. Next slide. All right, so in the months preceding the session, there's actually a lot that goes into a bill before it's even introduced. And there's a lot that you as a concerned constituent can do to influence what goes into a bill. So in this year before the session, constituents and groups can meet with their legislators and make their concerns and legislative priorities heard. We actually had one of our volunteers this past year who came across this audit, which found that the oil and gas industry in Colorado had very little accountability and oversight, and they were missing like tens of thousands of monthly reports over the course of a couple of years. And so she actually brought this up to her representative and was able to get this in a bill that's going to be run in the 2022 session. So don't underestimate your influence that you can have as a citizen. So after this nebulous bill concept is formed, one representative or senator generally decides to be the prime sponsor of the bill, meaning that they're going to introduce it. And then in the October and November months, a bill drafter irons out the nitty-gritty details of what will go into that bill. And then a couple weeks before the session, legislators pick their top 5 bills that they'd like to introduce. And then within the first month of the session, legislators have to introduce all of the bills. Next slide. So after a bill gets introduced, it's immediately assigned to the most relevant committee, which is called a committee of reference. For us, that's generally going to be the Energy and Environment Committee in the House or the Transportation and Energy Committee in the Senate. And then these committees can offer amendments to these bills, which are called committee reports. So at this stage in the process, you as a citizen can actually have a tremendous influence. So at this stage, you can start building grassroots support for a bill. You can start mobilizing members of your community to take action. You can phone bank, canvass door to door, utilize social media campaigns, or mobilize people at events. At this stage, you can also start calling and emailing your representative, trying to meet with them via Zoom or in person to express your support for a bill. And importantly, you can actually attend committee hearings and testify in front of these committees in support or in opposition to a bill. If public speaking isn't your thing, you can submit a written testimony. And actually, one cool thing about the COVID era of doing this work is that you can testify from anywhere in the state now via Zoom. So there's more geographically diverse representation among us citizen climate lobbyists. Next slide. So let's say a bill gets referred favorably out of this initial committee. It can go to another committee. Oftentimes it'll go to the Appropriations Committee if there needs to be some sort of fiscal impact analysis. And then from there, if it's referred favorably, it goes to the Senate or House floor for what's called the second reading. Here you can have an influence by reaching out to your representative before an important floor vote. So it gets read one time and then they do a voice vote, which is all in favor say aye, all opposed say no. Whichever chorus of voices is louder, they go with that one. And then they reconvene on a second day and do a vote where they actually count the votes. And then from there, if it is approved, it goes to the next chamber and the process starts all over again. Next slide. So the same process would happen in the next chamber, gets introduced, it goes to the relevant committee, might go to the Appropriations Committee, etc. And you can also testify for these in front of these committees in the second chamber. And then, okay, from there, let's say both chambers approve this bill. You would think smooth sailing from here, the bill goes to the governor's desk, but that's actually not the case. There is one important complication, and that is amendments. So let's say one chamber makes an amendment to a bill that's somewhat significant. The initial chamber would have to approve this amendment before the bill can move forward. So let's say, for example, the bill is to phase out fossil fuels in Colorado by 2030. Let's say it originates in the House, and then in the Senate, they add the amendment, okay, all fossil fuels except for coal production. The House would have to approve that for the bill to move forward. So if neither chamber will budge, then there's sort of a stalemate and the bill would just die. What they can do here is they often form a conference committee, and the conference committee's purpose is to come up with some compromise amendments that can meet both chambers halfway and that both chambers will be satisfied with. So if both chambers approve these compromise amendments, then the bill can move forward to the governor. Next slide. And then once the bill arrives on the governor's desk, the governor has three options. One, they can sign the bill into law, in which case it becomes law. Two, they can veto it. And both chambers can actually override this veto if they have a 2/3 majority vote in each chamber. Or if the bill sits on the governor's desk for 10 days during the session without the governor signing it, it just automatically becomes law. This is 30 days if the session has already ended. So it can become law without the governor even signing it. And that happens with some frequency. So there you have it. That's the Colorado legislative process in a nutshell. And I'm going to pass it on to Amy Petray-Hill now, who's going to, or not Amy, sorry, I'm going to pass it on to Brent, who's going to be talking about our plans for this legislative session and how to read a bill.
Yeah, thanks, Allie. And yeah, as I said, I'm going to cover two different things. Basically, start with some plans for the 2022 legislative session and our advocacy efforts. and then follow up with how to find and read a bill. Go ahead and next slide. So yeah, if you take a look, we have the next 6 months calendar generally laid out, and it goes from December 2021 through May of 2022. And you got color coding on the left that indicates what we're plotting on this calendar here. The yellow region is the end of this year, December, through basically the start of the legislative session, which starts on January 12th. This is when we recommend we will have you guys set up a get to know you meeting with your legislators or your senators and your representatives. And the orange triangles that you see every other Monday, those are the 350 Colorado's legislative and action committees. We'll be meeting regularly. So as say bill language gets put out throughout the session, we'll take that up. We'll formulate fact sheets and then distribute that out to folks and start coordinating advocacy in front of the legislature themselves. And the session generally runs through May. The exact date, we don't have that written down, so don't take this as like gospel, but it does end in May, depending on the legislative schedule. And we also plan on having something akin to a climate lobby week that we had, like similar to what we had last year. And that we envision somewhere around the middle of the legislative session, so near the end of March. And that would be basically the time when we set up a second round of meetings and we're advocating on behalf of specific bills. Those specific bills we call our priority bills. So yep, that's the general lay of the land and how we see things. Go ahead and next slide. And oh, maybe go back one. Okay, well, we're gonna try to fix that slide real quick, hopefully. But basically, the second slide is just going to describe the legislative advocacy that we envision. It seems maybe my slide doesn't want to show up, so I can go ahead and just try to give a quick a verbal explanation. I see Amy's pulling up the PDF version. Here we go. Thank you, Amy. Awesome. So this is how the Legislation and Action Committee envisions supporting advocacy throughout the session. We're going to provide education and analysis. So this is a great example of one of the education meetings where we're hosting this training. We hope to have another one before Climate Lobby Week sometime around the middle of the session. And we plan to provide plain language fact sheets to everyone about our priority bills. That is so that you don't have to go and read the legalese that is a bill and bill text. And there's just an image of an example on the slide that's a fact sheet about a plastic pollutions bill that ran last year. So as you can see, it comes with resources and graphics to help explain it. And then we also plan to identify and uplift some priority bills. Since there's going to be a lot of legislation and we can only focus our efforts on a smaller fraction of them, we plan to find the ones that are most important for the climate and for our members and uplift those, and then identify bill captains who will be available to answer any specific questions about a bill. They'll help formulate those fact sheets, and then they'll help you draft any comments and support you throughout the legislative session as it relates to that bill. And finally, for coordination support, we'll be sending out email reminders about when to testify in front of the legislature on key bills. And we'll also be trialing some coordination on the Slack platform. So stay tuned on that. We're still developing that, but that is a thing we learned from last session that we want to try to incorporate this session. Next slide, please. So yeah, just going in real quick to how to find a bill. This and my remaining slides are all going to be just pretty high level, showing resources that are available. And all of these resources and links will be provided in a tip sheet at the end of the day's training. So if you are worried about having links or notes, don't worry, those will be provided. So yeah, how do you find a bill? Here on the right is a picture of the legislature's website. Its URL is leg.colorado.gov/bills. And they have a great search box that'll search just the available bills. If you just know some keywords, you can typically find a bill that way. And if you happen to know the bill number, say someone has conveyed that to you, then I'd say you should go the direct URL route. And so just at the end of bills on the URL, you do a / and then the bill number. And how those bill numbers are formulated is shown here. Basically, the first two letters are the chamber of origin, HB for House Bill and SB for Senate Bill. Then that's followed by a 2-digit number related to the legislation year. So all of the bills in this upcoming session will be followed by 22 for 2022. And then a dash and a 3- or 4-digit number based on the order the bill was introduced. So just throwing an example down here to make that make sense is the third bill introduced in the House this upcoming session will be HB 22-1003. And finally, if these two options fail you, it's actually pretty easy to find bills by Googling them with a few other keywords about the bill and Colorado legislature or ledge bill, something of that sort. So yeah, those are the options. Next slide. Now, for a bit on like how to read a bill, I would recommend that you do not go straight to the full text of a bill language. Seriously, the summaries are a great place to start. As I'm also showing on this slide, this is a picture of the state website for specifically House Bill 21-1266, which was the Environmental Justice Disproportionately Impacted Communities bill from last session. And as you can see on the web page, one of the first things under the bill title and description is a summary. That is a great place to get started. These bill summaries are supposed to be written in plain language, and they are required by the state to be objective. So there's not supposed to be politicking and spin in the summaries. And they do a great job of breaking down the most important features of the bill, noting that it is a summary. There's always going to be some things that are left out, especially when you go to the plain language, it'll simplify some stuff. And so the only important thing to note about the bill summaries is that the bill summaries reflect the bill as it is introduced. So as it works its way through committees, if there's a lot of amendments to the bill summary is not going to be updated with each amendment. It only gets updated when it passes from the House to the Senate or from the Senate to the House. So that's just something to know about, that there are times where a bill has like a big facelift through lots of amendments. Then you may need to dig into the amendments, or we will dig into the amendments and convey those major changes to you. And then I just also want to note that the sidebar information has lots of useful information as well. You have, say, the prime sponsors on the top right, and the committees that the bill is working its way through on the bottom right. And those are also links, so you can get the contact information or you can get the committee information by clicking on any of those. Yeah, next slide. Okay, and this is just a little bit more. Again, this is if you really want to read a bill, most people won't need to get to this step, but I did just want to flag that if you look at some bill text, again, this is HB 1266 from last session. At the bottom of the PDF, you see these instructions, and they describe what the different, it's like a key that describes what the different symbols and formats mean. So basically shaded text, it denotes a House amendment. Double underlined text denotes a Senate amendment. Capital letters are new material added to an existing statute. Non-capital letters are the existing statute. And then dash throughs are words that are being changed in the statute. So just showing this little example here on the bottom, you start seeing everything is double underlined. So this is all being implemented through a Senate amendment. And you can see it starts with lowercase letters that then turn to uppercase. The lowercase is the existing statute, uppercase is the new language. So you can skim and go straight to the new language to see what's being changed. And then also if there's a specific strike through, like for example, at the bottom line 22, shall be is changed to is. So just simple explaining that. And again, House amendments, which you don't see on here, would be shaded as opposed to underlined. Next slide. And this is the last resource. And again, all of these will be provided in a tip sheet. So don't fret if you don't have a chance to really see this. I know it's also pretty small, but this is a resource that the state provides where it gives an example bill and it points to each of the individual components of the bill and tells you what they are. So these resources are available if you really do want to read a bill, but I would still suggest to start with the bill summary and the fact sheets on the priority bills that we put out there, because that's gonna be like the best holistic view of a bill and probably the easiest to digest. So that's it for me, I think. Next slide. And I will be transitioning now to Amy Petray-Hill, who will be going over how to do your advocacy and tell your story to be an effective citizen lobbyist.
So good morning, everybody. Thank you for spending your time with us this morning. My name is Amy Petray-Hill, and like many of you, I am interested, I care about this issue, but I don't have training as an environmental scientist or anything like that. In my day job, I'm actually a chaplain and a faith leader. So what I'm hoping to share today is how important it is for all of us to raise our voices, because each and every one of us can have a positive impact on the legislation going forward this year. So, first of all, before you even get started, even if you've never done any legislative advocacy, know starting out that you are just a force for good to start out with. Your story and your passion for environmental justice, caring for the planet has power, because as a constituent, those in the Colorado legislature know that you have a vote and they actually want to hear from you. And so the rest of this is just going to be a few steps on how to make this easier for you and to be more effective in your citizen lobbying going forward in partnership with 350. And please note that 350 volunteers, the people who are speaking today, are here to support you. So you're not having to do this alone. So first, one of the places to start in doing legislative advocacy is in articulating for yourself why you're doing this. And we did this in on the Jamboard, but we're thinking about what is our personal stake. And that might be a story, it might be a value, but is our quote skin in the game that gives us a passion and that we want to express to our legislators so they understand why this is important to us. Examples of a personal stake can be, you know, if you've personally been impacted by environmental events like wildfires, hurricanes, floods, but maybe you haven't, and that's okay too. You can also talk about your values and how your values require all of us to take action to ensure that our earth remains livable and to try and keep the temperature rise just to 1.5 centigrades. Or you might have a life-altering event that activated you into action. You have to find what works for you. Just as an example for me, If I was telling my story and formulating my stake, I would say my values as a person of faith and needing to care for the planet. But I also have family, my brother, sister-in-law, niece, and nephew, who have had to flee from their homes 2 times over the last 2 years because of fires. And that's traumatized my young niece and nephew, and it's impacted in the midst of COVID, their education. So for example, that might be something that I think about that I want to share with legislators and express, this is important to me because it directly impacts my family. This is how. But again, you don't have to have that kind of a story. You just want to get clear for yourself, why am I doing this? And be able to share this with your legislator. Okay. And this leads into a model of storytelling that, again, you don't have to use this, but it's just helpful often to kind of center and get our story together. And it's this framework that's called the Marshall Grant Framework, which is the story of self, us, and now. So that story of self is what I was just talking about. It's our stake in the game, in why we care about climate change and a livable planet. And it's what calls us personally to take action and to talk to our legislator. Also, in partnership with 350 and working with other people in your breakout groups, which we're going to do later, we learn about why for our whole community, these bills are important, or climate change legislation is important. And it illustrates how we're connected. So to give an example, the story of me or us or self for me about my family would be the story of self, my brother and him and his family having to move. A story of us could be if I was meeting with a group of people and other people have been so directly impacted or they have values, I might say, you know, and other people I know have experienced this same thing. And here are some statistics that I received from 350.org. It tells me that my story isn't alone, but it is echoed throughout Colorado. And then you have this story of now. What that means is looking at our stories through the lens of what is immediate. We know that there's long-term goals, right? But the story of now places some urgency on why we need our legislators to take a particular action or support a particular bill or be aware of what is happening in Colorado right now. And you pull that all together and you have your public narrative. Now, again, if you're sitting here going, what? Don't worry, we're going to have a chance to practice this in our breakouts. And again, you're going to have the support of the 350 Colorado team to help you figure this out if this is a little confusing. Also, you know what style of advocacy works best for you. So don't feel trapped. This is just kind of a tool that you can use to craft your story, but find the way that is authentic to you. So next, so now we have our story, and hopefully, you know, when we do our first visit, we're going to be doing it with other people. And as we do this as a group, there are some basic skills that we want to bring with us so that we lobby effectively, we talk effectively to our legislators. So here are some lobbying basics. First, we want to be passionate, but we also want to be polite, courteous, and professional. Unfortunately, we know in this particular environment, people are not always civil, and our legislators and their staff people experience not only a lot of support, but also some not very nice language. And we want to be the people who are compassionate and passionate, but also respectful of our legislators and the work that they're doing. So we want to build a long-term relationship, and long-term relationships require mutual respect. And from that place of mutual respect, we can then educate and share our stories. We also want to be clear that when you're lobbying, even if you're partnering with 350 to do it, you are doing it as a constituent. You're not doing it as part of 350. This is your voice, your story that you are sharing. because you're a citizen lobbyist. And so that's the position that we encourage people to come from, because really your story is the most powerful story you can share. Then when we're meeting with our legislators in our first meeting, we're focusing on creating a relationship. And we want them to know we want them to be a climate champion and ally, which means that we might not be asking them about specific bills, but we just want them to know who we are. They want their staff to know who we are. So when they hear a call from us, or we ask them for a meeting in the future, or we send them an email or a letter, they can go, oh, I know this person. You don't, during this first meeting with legislators, want to push too hard for specific on bills. The reason for this is not that legislators are trying to keep stuff from us, but there is a lot of work before bills are introduced and a lot of talking with different stakeholders. And many legislators, in order to make sure that the bills can go forward and be effective, may hold some of that legislation close to the chest until they present it, in which case it's out in the public and they will share it with us, and we will be sharing information with you from 350. But that's just a heads up. Before the legislative session starts, we may need to be a little patient about hearing particulars on particular bills. And of course, when you're done, please share your experience with us with email. We're going to tell you how on the tip sheet, because we want to celebrate your success and you're sharing your story. And we also just want to know how it goes. So now I have one more slide, which is step 3, setting up a meeting. And again, there's going to be more information on this, but just a quick overview. As Brent talked about, you want to do a little basic research on your legislator, just to find out what they care about, maybe what you have in common with them about your passions for climate change around. Then you call and you request via email or phone call a meeting. And when you do that, a legislator, if they're not available and you end up meeting with a staff member, don't feel disrespected. Those staff members are often going to be key in helping the legislator, and they will be talking to you and lots of other citizen lobbying activists. So just be aware, you may speak with the legislator and you can ask for that, but if you need to speak with a staff person, your staff person doing environmental legislation, that's okay too. You want to make sure you prepare for your meeting, which is if you're going with a group, make sure who's going to start, who's going to go next, kind of share a little bit about the stories that you're going to tell or the values you want to share. And you want to keep it short. So if you can keep it to 1 or 2 minutes, that helps. And then you want to be sure and thank your legislator and your staff with an email or a phone call after your meeting. To again, strengthen that relationship and be one of those people that is civil and supportive of legislators. And now it is my honor to hand over the presentation to Edie Hooten, one of our representatives and a climate justice champion here in Colorado. And Edie, take it away.
Thank you, Amy. Hi, everyone. I really appreciate being here and to see the number of people participating. That's excellent. It's very important, this training that you're getting, and just what I heard from Brent and then now from Amy, I just want to emphasize everything that Amy said about how to be an effective advocate for the legislation that you are running is absolutely critical. The points that she made. So a few things in my experience as a legislator. It's very helpful to me when constituents request a meeting that they come in a group. So I'd say anywhere from like 4 to 6 people. If you have a group together, and maybe several, 1 or more, are actual constituents of the legislator that you're speaking to, that is extremely helpful and it's impactful. There are some models, I know some organizations use a model that I personally think is very effective for me and that I have used when I'm advocating for something myself to my own caucus or to my committee members. It's always good when you're making an appointment with a legislator to designate someone as a timekeeper. So whether you're meeting with a staff person or actually in the meeting with the legislator, get clarification on how much time you have, and then designate someone as the timekeeper. And then when you're 5 minutes out from the amount of time that you've been given, have the timekeeper make note of that. It's very important that you all in a meeting get a quick 1-minute intro. And Amy touched on this, and I'm just going to emphasize that. Hold on. I see yeah, here we are. I wasn't aware that I couldn't see whether or not I was actually, hello, everybody. I just realized it was my picture. So everyone should give an introduction of themselves, a 1-minute introduction, and why you do care about this issue, whatever you're advocating for. A personal story is the most effective. Someone else's story, but really make it a personal thing to you and not a broad, I really care a lot about a livable climate. That's important. Of course you do. You wouldn't be meeting with the legislator advocating if you didn't. So if you can somehow tie your advocacy back to the legislation that you're speaking to, that's impactful. It's always important to do a little bit of homework on the legislator before you have that meeting, because you want to give them an appreciation for something they've done. If it is a climate champion like Tracy Burnett, who absolutely is on this call, and she is a client, she is a champion, then you will have a lot to refer to. If it's a Republican or someone who has not necessarily championed environmental legislation, but if you go through the legislation they have supported and you can find a shared value there, it's possible. You can always find a shared value. And so you point to that because you want that openness and the willingness to listen to you, and nothing like a little bit of appreciation to make that happen, because everyone pays attention when they're being complimented. And you should have one person designated to do the appreciation. So I will say that and make clear that you're prepared for that appreciation when you go into a meeting. And then you're going to state the goal of the meeting. If you should have a fairly good sense of where the legislator stands on your issue. And if they are neutral, your goal is to answer questions and get them to just move the needle a little bit on where they are, and establish a relationship with them and establish yourself as a resource. If they are highly skeptical, and you're going to be talking to people who are highly skeptical, and sometimes legislators are hard to read because, to Amy's point, they don't want to make a commitment until they've had a chance to study legislation, talk to their colleagues, talk to high-profile environmental organizations, get a better understanding of where this bill might go, if it has a future. So let me see what else. I wrote down a bunch of notes before the call. Oh yes, I think this is very important. You want to ask open-ended questions. So you don't want yes or no questions, like, have you ever heard about us? Yes. You know, you want to, and before you have a meeting, you want to come up with a list of open-ended questions, because that keeps the dialogue going between you and the legislator or the staff member. And you want to be very mindful that the conversation is fairly evenly divided between you and the legislator. So it really feels like an active dialogue. And open-ended questions, then you're going to get a lot more information about what the legislators' concerns are, and opportunities where you might be able to move the needle with them by providing them with information. So you want that. Let me see. Yeah, and the goal in a meeting like this, you have to assume that this is not going to be your first and last meeting with the legislator. It's the beginning of a relationship. And again, it helps to have constituents in the room. But if you don't have constituents in the room, that's fine, because you will have leaders in their district, in their county, in a community that they represent, who are supportive. And you can make a note of that. In fact, it's always a good idea that you bring in a fact sheet and that you let them know who the community leaders are that are supporting your legislation. And that would include colleagues of the legislators, other legislators. So that's always helpful information, because honestly, some legislators are highly specialized in their area. And when things get really crazy busy, we only meet for 120 days and we have to pass a state budget. This year it's $40 billion. That's a lot of work. And we've got our bills. I already have way too many. I've got 12 and I'm trying to figure out how to cut that down. But things, as we get closer to the end of session, they become more stressful. So I think it's super important to be very mindful of their time, the relationship you want to establish, and be a source of information for them. And don't get too frustrated if you feel like you're not, if you feel like you don't have enough time, because as I said, again, it's building a relationship, and often it's building a relationship with the legislative aid, right? Don't expect to move them from 0 to 10. If they've really sort of got their heels dug in and they're just being polite by accepting a meeting, you just want to move them a little bit more by getting their concerns out there. If they're neutral and leaning, you want to get a little bit more out of them. What else can we provide? What would help, what would help you understand the legislation better? Or is there somebody else you need to talk to or confirm this with? Or what are your concerns that we can help you address? So that I find is very helpful to me. Always information sheets, always knowing what kind of, what other organizations are supporting the legislation, what community leaders are supporting it. And let me see, you guys have really covered, Amy did a lot there. I like the idea of small groups coming in to see me. And it's great to have a timekeeper just for your purposes. Have someone who takes notes. So that's got to be someone fairly well-versed on the legislation that you're meeting about. So they should be pretty familiar with that policy, because they'd be the best person to take notes. They should take notes and keep track of how many open-ended questions were asked, and then share that information with your group. Yeah, don't forget the appreciation part. And let me see. Have a primary ask. Have a primary ask. And well, would you support my bill? Or would you consider co-sponsoring the bill or being a sponsor on the bill? Or supporting it in committee, right? So that's a good thing for you to know. If you're meeting with legislators who aren't sitting on a committee where the bill is going to be heard, then ask if they'd be willing to support the bill if it comes to the House floor for a vote. If they sit on a committee where the bill is going to be heard, ask if they would consider supporting the bill in committee, or if there are questions that they would like to see asked in the committee for a more robust conversation, or who else they'd like to hear from. And always be prepared to have a secondary ask. So you kind of have a higher level ask, and then you have a secondary ask, and something lighter, something not quite as demanding. Like I've got a resolution I'm running that supports the federal efforts for a carbon fee and dividend. And that's a resolution. And it's a market-based approach to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and market-based approaches are often very successful in getting you to where you want to be. But supporting a resolution is not as deep of a commitment as supporting a bill. So you could always just say, well, I'm meeting with you about Representative Houghton's bill on limiting the reissuance of coal permits for, coal-fired plants. And they may be like, oh man, I've got Comanche 3s in my district, and I don't know, that seems like too much for me. But a carbon fee and dividend on that is probably something I could get behind. So that would be like a secondary ask. So figure that out before you go in. Always look for bipartisan support. Don't be afraid to talk to Republicans. It's not going to be as engaging a conversation as you would have with Democrats who are naturally going to be aligned with you. Some will know more about environmental issues than others, but because some work primarily on education or, social justice issues or mental health issues, but they're more inclined to be supportive. But there are plenty of Republicans who would welcome an opportunity to talk to you just to learn more about the legislation that you're advocating for. And we all appreciate that. I don't think anyone needs to hear again how important it is to just be civil and polite. We want that. And so obviously that's something that we want to extend. And some conversations will be disappointing, but that's fine because you'll have plenty that will be very encouraging. And don't let that discourage you, because this very much is a process. And you would be surprised at how many legislators have moved significantly in their position on a bill just through information and regular engagement. So with that, happy to answer any questions, or maybe this is a good time to, I'll let you, Duncan, decide what happens next. But my colleague, Rep. Tracy Burnett, who's also sits on the Energy and Environment Committee with me, she's here and she's got a lot to say, and we could probably both answer questions when we're done, but I'll let Duncan decide that.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Edie. Oh, sorry, Ali. Yeah, we're just going to hear from Tracy. Tracy, if you have any quick tips you wanted to share with us, we'd love to hear from you as well. And then we'll kick it over to both of you for a quick Q&A session that Ali will moderate.
Well, I got to thank Edie, Rep. Hooton, for really laying out a very comprehensive look at this. Just remember, elected officials have egos. And so it is really good to thank them and be respectful. And I look at it, you think about where they are coming from. If you think about those shared values, if you think an elected official is neutral or maybe negative, put yourselves in their mind and in their district and come from there. Try to understand where they're coming from. It is absolutely appropriate to ask what their concerns are, because once you understand those concerns, that's where you can start figuring out, well, where do you go from there? What can you do to move that needle a little bit? I can't emphasize enough, data informs, but stories persuade. And so just keep that in mind. Data informs. When we're looking through all these bills, we're looking at the data, but when we're sitting in committee or on the floor, the stories are the thing that persuades. So, and when we're talking about stories and data, I mean, sometimes data does help. I can think of just a very, very few instances. It's got to be very local to Colorado, to the community, to the legislator who's actually you're trying to persuade. And I'll give a very specific example. One of my bills was regarding gas energy efficiency and moving to clean heat technology in buildings. And I got a written testimony from a contractor in a rural Western area who does geothermal systems, and he's been doing it for 10 years. And he talked about how many people he employs. That I used in my testimony. And I also, it was picked up by the media. So there are instances where data and stories make a difference. Just a couple other things. On one of my bills regarding using green construction materials, greener construction materials. One piece of data really hit me because I was talking about this really crazy thing, like concrete and steel and things like that. And one advocate said, cement, which is the glue that holds concrete together. If cement were a nation, the processes used to make that cement would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. Wow. Okay, this is something that really brings it back to the layman who can really, really understand things. And I'll just tell one other little thing that really stuck with me. We had a plastics recycling bill, and well, basically getting rid of plastic grocery bags. And I remember one of the proponents said, the average American eats a credit card worth of plastic every year. Wow. Okay. So this is, you can use data, but it's got to be very, very specific. But stories tell a lot more. I couldn't emphasize enough, we are looking at like 600 bills a year. 600. Think about how little time we have to review these things. So I can't emphasize enough, don't email us volumes of data. The fact sheet, 1 page, bullet points. Don't be offended if I only have 15 minutes to talk with you. It's 15 minutes of valuable, valuable time that I am devoting to hearing what your concerns are. So don't be offended by that. There was one question you had about what if a legislator doesn't want to talk to you? Well, talk to one of their colleagues and talk to the bill sponsor and let them know that so-and-so doesn't want to talk to you. That helps inform, and we're counting votes. So that's okay to do it, or tell a lobbyist. So I'm going to stop there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Edie has done a fabulous job. She's done this longer than I have. I've done it during the COVID remote thing. I didn't even have people come into my office. So fire away.
Yeah, so thank you so much for that information, Representative Burnett. We're going to use the raise hand feature for this question and answer session with these two representatives. And we'd love if you could keep your questions concise so we can get as many questions answered as possible. Before we dive into that, I just wanted to see if any of the 6 people who had unanswered questions in the chat wanted to ask their questions. Gwen, I saw you had a question a while ago. Do you get that answered?
Yeah, I just always, hi, Edie.
Hi, Gwen.
you?
Great to see you.
You too. Thanks for being here. I wondered if you could share a story about when you changed your mind on a bill, and like if you can remember a meeting with someone or someone's that was really effective in changing you, and you're like, huh, maybe I'll go a different direction with this.
Yes. We had, okay, well, let me just talk about a ballot initiative that we just voted on in Boulder. And it was called Bedrooms Are for People. And Boulder has very strict ordinances on how many unrelated people can share a home. And it really needs to be changed. And I was very supportive of the ordinance or of the proposed ballot initiative until I spent a year and a half working for protections for mobile homeowners, because mobile park owners can be pretty hostile and aggressive and grossly unfair to homeowners, mobile homeowners who tend to be very low income. Many of them are disabled on a fixed income, and they take advantage, which is often happens to poor people. They take advantage of the fact they don't have resources to defend themselves. And what I learned in the process of working on this legislation is that private equity firms were buying up mobile home parks and being incredibly aggressive in raising lot rents and things like that. And that Zillow has tens of thousands of single family homes that they are now selling to private equity homes. And with the whole purpose of basically turning these homes into tenements. And so I went from a support position for this ordinance to oppose until we could get an ordinance written that would protect neighborhoods and prevent our community from turning into neighborhoods of tenements where there's no opportunity for a family to ever get into a single family home again. Because being able to have an income earning property like that puts taking a home and out of reach for most families. So I don't know, Gwen, if that, I'm sure I could come up if I really thought about it. There have been plenty of times in committee meetings, and this is something that I've learned over the years. Often before you go into a committee meeting, if you have your colleagues will say, "Can I have your support on the bill?" If I'm pretty clear that I'm going to support the bill, and I'm also clear about what the opposition is going to say, I have no problem making a commitment to that legislator so they can count their votes. Are they going to be able to get that bill out of committee so it can go to the next committee or go to the House floor? But there are times when I will say to my colleague, I need to hear testimony first. And they might say, well, what questions can I answer? And if I have questions, I'll be able to share them with them. But if I'm not exactly sure, then I and I know who's going to be testifying, it's going to be robust on both sides of the issues, then I reserve the right to be persuaded by testimony, to be informed. Because to Tracy's point, we have 600 bills that come from the legislature. You can't meet with every single organization that's going to advocate for a bill. So committee meetings are incredibly important, and I encourage all of you to participate in them. And let me tell you, you often are only given 2 or 3 minutes to testify. And the way that you can extend that time is to make sure that legislators on the committee where your bill is being heard have questions that you would like to ask. You would like them to ask you, especially if you have a real expertise in the area. So you have people testifying who just want to express their support for a bill. And then you'll have other people testifying. And Tracy is a master at this, bringing in a lot of expert witnesses. And so it's very important that her colleagues on the committee have a lot of questions that they can ask this well-informed testifier to keep that testimony going. So the committee members are better informed. And that is an important strategy that you should consider as an organization.
Yeah, and I'd just like to,
Yeah.
I'll give you a little secret on that too. On one of my bills, I actually laid out for all the my colleagues who I thought were were going to vote for the bill. I laid out questions that ask this testifier these questions. And so the more you can feed those things, we had this fabulous conversation about a subject that all the committee members learned about. It was the Buy Clean Colorado. But the more that you can keep that discussion going becomes very robust and very informative. So just had to pipe in on that one.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. Thank you so much.
I'm going to give Harmony a chance to ask her question.
Hello, thank you so much for all this great information. I do a lot of work at the Denver City Council level, and my city council person told me that it is not her job to lobby the other council people on an issue, and it's her job to represent the constituents. And listening to you all talk, it sounds like a big part of how these things happen is, are you going to support my bill? Are you like that sort of thing? Can you tell me your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're counting votes. Your bill doesn't pass unless you count votes. You need to know who is where and whether they're staying with you.
And I would add, lobbying your colleagues and representing your constituents aren't mutually exclusive. Part of being an effective policymaker is understanding your constituents, obviously, but also getting buy-in from your colleagues who are voting on your ordinance or on your legislation. So you inform them and constituents inform them. And sometimes if you have to take an unpopular position with your constituents, but you feel that you are well enough informed that it has to be, you then become obligated to explain that to your constituents, explain your position, why you stand where you do. In rural Colorado, there's no point in, if you're voting for gun rights legislation, well, guess what? I mean, you're going to have to go back to your constituents and explain why you did that. Or if you're from Boulder and you voted against gun rights legislation, well, then you have to go back to your constituents and explain that. It's very important that you do that. But, I don't know how you can be effective as a policymaker without informing your colleagues and being open to be informed by them. And you can't always read exactly where your constituents are going to be. I don't know any legislator that I work with who feels like they know exactly where their constituents are going to be on any given issue. That was a
Awesome.
really good question.
That's
Now,
really
Say with that one, the one city council person, think about their constituents. Think about it for where she's coming from. Start there, because and see if you can persuade her from a constituent standpoint to move toward what you're thinking.
awesome. Thank you for that. And then a second part of this is, are there any Republican representatives that we should be focusing on that could possibly be climate allies?
I would say it depends on the issue.
I would say jobs. If you can, deregulation, wildfires, wildfire resilience, these are areas that we've got, that we can get some persuadable.
Right. Market-based solutions.
Market-based solutions, not shutting down an industry, making it safer.
And don't talk about regulation ever.
Yes.
Don't do that.
Freedom, think of freedom and choice and things like that. There are, I mean, this summer I had, well, Edie and I both attended a conference of that was focused on new energy, green energy. And there were Republicans there. Thank goodness we could come together. But here's one thing that's really stuck in my mind. Don't talk about climate change. Talk about that the climate is changing. It's very subtle things, but again, try to think of yourself, put yourself in their position and where they come from, and see where you can go from there. That's so important.
It is, and I will add to that too. Thank you, Tracy. On my bills, unless I know it's impossible, I always look for Republican co-prime. And what I will do is I will go to Republican leadership in my chamber and I'll say, I have this bill. Is there anyone in your caucus that you think would be interested in talking to me about it? I have always had a suggestion about who to talk to, and at least half the time I'm successful. So you can always get in touch with Tracy and me or any other Democratic legislators that you work with and ask them on this particular issue, are they aware of any Republican legislators that you think would be approachable?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we are going to try to wrap up. We're just going to do one more question from Nick, and then we're going to move into the breakout groups exercise.
Thanks, Allie, and thanks, representatives, for your time today. I wanted to ask, we're talking a lot about in-person meetings today. I was wondering, beyond the in-person meeting with things like phone calls and letters and petitions, what role do those play in your decisions? And also, if only 1 to 6 people are coming to a meeting, if there's more people, more constituents who are supportive of an issue, what's the best way to kind of showcase their voice beyond just the few that are in the room?
Well, go ahead, Edie.
Well, I think both of us, it all works in the aggregate. Phone calls, I wouldn't say so much unless you have a personal relationship with the legislator. You can establish a relationship with his staffer more easily through a phone call. Stay in touch with legislators year round. Don't just limit it to the legislative session, because that's when we're all just crazy. That doesn't mean we don't make time, but we have a lot less time. So this is excellent that you're meeting with Tracy and me now. So plan on doing it year round. And Zoom calls, I find, are very effective. Don't you, Tracy?
Absolutely.
A lot more people can be included. Our offices are not large, they're small. And then so we try and find conference rooms, but the Capitol's a very old building. There aren't many of them there. So as much as I like in-person meetings, I think the Zoom meetings have been wildly successful for legislators. And that combination of the Zoom calls with information that you can provide the legislator, emails, that all works. Emails from constituents are the most effective.
Yeah, I'd say if you all have basically one thing to say, it is really helpful to have in testimony, have one person be that spokesperson. I mean, if you just, and I'm going to be really honest about this, sitting, in these very controversial bills, when you have, I mean, I've asked organizations to do this. Look, I want to hear from this organization, that one, that one, that one. 1 to 3 people testifying from that organization is more effective than having 30 people with 2 minutes each. It's just, I mean, we're sitting there for hours and hours and hours. So be very thoughtful about how you do that. And I'd say written testimony is great. If you're a constituent, that's great. Very personal stories. These are the kind of things that really make a difference. But hours and hours of everybody saying the same thing, it's just difficult. I mean, I think Edie and I try exceptionally hard to keep, because people care so much about these issues. But it's the more concise and personal you can be, that will be more effective.
That's right. And that reminds me that a former legislator who chaired a committee, and she had a reputation as being a really outstanding chair. And that's one of the things she would say at the beginning of the meeting. If there are a group of you here and you all are on the same page, please have someone speak on your behalf, and everyone who is with you, whose position you support, then have them all raise their hand so the committee members can see, if there are 200 people in a committee room and there's one person speaking on behalf of a group and everyone else who belongs to that group is raising their hand, that's very powerful. So just sort of riffing off of what Tracy said.
Great. Thanks for both of those answers. I think we can have one more question from Lori before we move on to the breakout groups exercise. So go ahead, Lori.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm Lori. First of all, thanks for all you do, Tracy and Edie. And Edie, I love you. But like the people that are on this call, this webinar, are already part of the solution, but the majority of citizens in Colorado and in this country, well, they're either too busy working 3 jobs or, they need to be educated environmentally. And so I'm wondering how, I would love to see in the newspaper or media every day, the simple action of the day, because everybody needs to be involved. I mean, legislation is great, important. We need to keep working on that, but it takes time that we don't have. And I think all citizens need to join in the fight against climate change.
Well, I'll take.
Yeah, go ahead, Tracy.
Yeah.
Go.
Okay, my thoughts are, first of all, I recognize that people's lives are very busy with raising their children and families. And when I encounter a constituent who says, I just haven't had time to do that, I'm raising my children, I'm like, you're doing the most important job in the world. So I think I think that it does take, we don't have to have everybody involved in every single part, but those of us who have the capacity to devote to this can bring more people along. The more you can, and I really, really do believe that change happens at the grassroots, in the community, in the state level and beyond. That is the way the power happens. And so those of you on this call who have the capacity to do more than somebody who's just trying to get through the day, to get food on their table, to have a safe place for their children to go to school and all that kind of stuff, you're doing phenomenal work. What you can do is just have a very simple message that can relate directly to those people who are so dang busy, to bring them along. I think you can get very overwhelmed thinking, climate crisis, oh my gosh, that's a huge, huge thing.
Mhm.
The more that you can, I know there's a lot of constituents who really care about this, but they don't have the time. If there's one thing they can do, like one little thing, one little phone call, that makes it much easier, because it's all those little things together that really move things along. And people ask, like, why did I pick being at the state legislature? Because I see so much change that starts in Colorado and then moves across the country. Our bills are changing the rest of the country on climate change. I really believe that. But I have you as the wind in my sails. All those little things that you do help me. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah. And I'll just add very quickly, when you see something posted on social media, don't just like it. If it's really important to you, retweet it. Retweet it with just a couple of words. I couldn't agree more. And when you retweet, it goes out to everyone on your, that is following you. And I was just advising a new candidate the other day. I said, she goes, how do I get exposure? No media picked up my news release announcing my candidacy. And I said, what you have to do is go to your big supporters and say, every time you post something, have them retweet it. And then that just continues to build the network of information. And so I just think that's a very effective way of filling in where the media does not, because they're very rarely going to tell you a plan of action, though we do have more and more online news sources that might be more open to that. But I think resharing a story, a link that you found very informative, just takes a second and can reach a heck of a lot of people.
I'd also have to say, I mean, we all are just hear all the stuff about the climate crisis all the time, and we all are just horrified by this. I really get inspired by positive solutions, like in the agriculture area, which is one of the areas I'm looking at, sequestering carbon through better soil health and things like that. I mean, you can get absolutely overwhelmed. I think we all are overwhelmed with the pandemic and all the other things in climate crisis. We are living in a climate crisis. The more we can come up and promote things that can address this in little bits of ways, that all gives us hope.
Great. Well, thank you, Representative Hooten and Representative Burnett, for your time. We really appreciate all of these thoughtful answers that you've given us. And now we're going to conclude this portion of the workshop and move on to the breakout groups activity. So we're going to break you all out into groups by senator. Some people are going to be in groups with people who don't share their senator, just because we had some groups where there's only one person. So the first activity we're going to have you all do is you're going to do an icebreaker where you state your name, what brings you here today, and what environmental issue or issues are most important to you. And then we're hoping that you all can exchange contact information and create a group chat or email of some sort so you all can stay in contact during the session. And then next, we would like you all to look at your calendars and find a few times in the next month that would work best for all of you guys to meet with your representative. Next, the second activity we're going to have you all do is practice your story of self and your legislative ask. So we're going to have each person take 1 minute to rehearse their story of self and what they're asking of their legislator. For example, you might say, hi, I live in Denver where the air quality is abysmal and we've been in ozone non-attainment for the past several years. I can't run every morning because often the air quality is so bad that it would hurt my lungs. So I'm asking you as my representative to support bold climate policies that would phase out fossil fuel production by 2030 and support a just transition. So we're going to have you do that. And then after everyone's done, you can return to the main room and we'll say farewell before everyone hops off. So without further ado, we're going to start assigning people to breakout groups. And I'm going to post this instruction document in the chat.
Thanks, folks. And as folks get distributed to breakout rooms and do their exercises and then finish, please do just check back into the main room because I would love to just say goodbye to folks before they hop off. So yeah, thanks.